We deliver the information, and that, as I said, for this particular report, we would be following up with the Environmental Protection Agency to see what the recommendation status was, and then report it to the appropriate congressional committees.
Let's go to Chicago. Charles, Republican. Hi, Charles.
Good morning. Will the GAO maintain an ongoing list of the overlapping government programs on their website so that we can watch year after year the progress being made? Thank you very much for C-SPAN.
We are still working out the mechanisms for that, but I expect that we will have it on our website. As I said, we're going to be issuing a report every year. I expect that we're going to update the status of each of the areas that we talked about this year and be adding new ones, and it will be in a single place on our website. As if you've checked our website, you'll also see that we have published this report in an electronic format, so that for each one of the issue areas that we talk about, you can actually drill down into all of our work about that issue, and for each one of the areas we've issued multiple reports over the years.
And that's gao.gov. And the report can be found online there.
Yes.
And Pat Dalton, final thoughts as we get ready to move on from this. What would be success in the GAO's estimation on this?
Success, I think, is to have a couple of things. One, certainly the discussion that has begun with this report is a discussion that we need to have. I think success would also be that we've actually tackled some of these areas and we can see improvement, that we're not just reporting the same thing year after year. So hopefully next year at this time we'll be talking about some of the successes and some of the accomplishments that have occurred, at least in some of the areas. I don't think it's going to be in all, but certainly in some.
Pat Dalton, the Chief Operating Officer at the Government Accountability Office. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Pleasure to be with you.
The Senate is currently in a quorum call. At about 4:30 Eastern, in under half an hour, the focus will turn to considering judicial nominations. There are 3 nominations that they'll be considering, and votes are expected at about 5:30 Eastern Time. The AP and other news outlets are reporting that Republican Senator John Ensign of Nevada is going to announce that he won't run for re-election. Senator Ensign acknowledged in June of 2009 that he had an extramarital affair with a former member of his campaign staff, and that he had helped her husband, a member of his congressional staff, obtain lobbying work with a Nevada company. Senator Ensign is under investigation by the Senate Ethics Committee. While we wait for senators to speak, here are remarks by Democratic Representative Henry Waxman of California. He's the ranking member of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce. He made remarks earlier today at the Center for American Progress on climate change and the EPA.
Speaking of tomorrow, on this Tuesday, we're having an important hearing in our committee, the Energy and Commerce Committee. Democrats on the Energy and Commerce Committee used our rights under the rules to insist on a hearing on climate science. To their credit, Chairman Upton and Subcommittee Chairman Whitfield scheduled the hearing for tomorrow, and we've invited 4 leading climate scientists to testify. We didn't think Senator Inhofe should be the only person to talk to our committee about science before we pass legislation. Well, I'm going to tell my Republican colleagues, as we must continue to do, that I'm not wedded to the language of our law from last year, that I'm willing to work with them on new approaches and creative ideas. We can start from a blank piece of paper. There are many ways to make progress on climate change. We can invest in research and development of clean energy technologies. We can promote energy efficiency. We can set a clean energy standard and build a smart grid. And we could put a price on carbon. I have my own views on all these issues. I think the bill that passed the House last year is the most effective approach. But I know that we need to find a way to work across party lines, and I'll tell our Republican counterparts that we want to work with them on other approaches if this can bring us together. And I'm hopeful, as I was on all those other issues where we ran up to a wall that seemed impossible to overcome, that we will start to work together. We need to be working side by side on a bipartisan basis. I want to conclude my, and not to give up hope that that can happen. I want to conclude my brief reflections on a historical context. Climate change is an environmental issue, it's an economic issue, but it's also fundamentally a moral issue. We have an opportunity to act now to forestall great harm to our nation and to the world. We had that kind of an issue at other times in our history. We had it during the civil rights debate, where leaders like Mike Mansfield and Everett Dirksen stood up and said, this is an issue that will not go away. It must be resolved. The time has come. And I think climate change is such an issue. If we don't act on this challenge, we will not meet our moral ability to shape our future. We will not meet our moral obligation to our children and future generations. And history will not judge us kindly. Our path forward may look forbidding. Our journey may be longer than we hoped last Congress, but we've got to keep in mind the moral imperative to act, the economic imperative to act, the environmental imperative to act, and not turn aside. We've got to keep pushing, we've got to keep working, and we will overcome. I just hope it won't take so many years that we will find that we'll be putting more money into adaptation to deal with the harm from climate change than we will in developing the technology that will allow us to deal with this problem. Thank you very much for this chance to address you.
Thank you so much, Congressman. That was very inspiring, and especially bringing us all to think about the urgency a little bit more than maybe we have been. I'm going to ask a quick question and then open it up to the floor, and we do have a microphone floating as well. You made an important point, I think, about the kind of shift from this being a regional issue to a partisan issue. And I was wondering, you also made a point about some emerging industries that have really been helped by investments in clean energy, the battery industry in Michigan, for instance. Do you see any way forward, sort of a regional approach that's also an industry approach, any way forward where industry could be talking to some of these Congress members and senators about their own particular districts and particular states in a way that might kind of bridge some of the ideological gaps?
I think that's an excellent point, because people need to hear, who are representatives, need to hear from those people they represent. And there isn't an issue on the floor of the House of Representatives where people don't start off, we need jobs, 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 and then they go off onto some other topic. But we do need jobs. And this approach to deal with these problems will produce a push in our economy forward. In fact, it's going to drive forward the economy, and I think it may well be the only way we're going to ever close the deficit. It'll produce the growth in our economy that will bring in more funds, and I'm open to the ideas of using some of the funds, if we put a price on carbon, to help reduce the deficit itself. But we've got to get people who have a stake in all of this back home to tell their representatives, Democrats or Republicans, that this is a jobs issue, not something that's based on some theory that environmentalists thought up to scare people, because that's what a lot of people believe is the fact of the matter.
That's great. Thank you. I want to open to press first. John, do you have anything since you got a shout out during the speech, I think you get the first question.
Congressman Waxman, it's John Broder with
Yes,
the New York
sir.
Times. You spoke only briefly about the role of the administration now that Congress appears to be largely paralyzed. Are you persuaded that they have the tools, the resources, and the political will to take the actions that are at least possible in this kind of a climate?
I believe the administration has the tools, the ability, and the determination to act. They have kept in mind the political opposition, which has led them to modify some of the proposed regulations. But when they modified the recent regulations, I think they made it quite strong and eased up on some of the industry concerns. There's nothing wrong with the EPA and other regulatory agencies looking at the costs of regulation and trying to figure out how to fashion regulation that will achieve the results with the least amount of disruption and cost to the people affected. The administration has got to stand up to the Republicans, and I cannot believe they would accept any of these riders or cuts to EPA. They're going to have to fight this out. And in the next 2 weeks, the Republicans have made the continuing funding resolution a battleground. They'll make the other bills a battleground, such as raising the debt ceiling and appropriations for the next fiscal year. But they cannot shut the government down on this issue, and they've got to have their bluff called. And so I expect the administration to stand up and be counted. It's one of the key planks upon which the President said he wanted to become the leader of our country. He wanted to lead on education, on health care, and the environment. If we can't get a major bill through in the environment as we did in health care, we at least have to use all the tools at our disposal by past laws that have been adopted, like the Recovery Act and the Clean Air Act, which the Supreme Court has told us on a 5-to-4 basis includes regulation of carbon. And I thought the way the EPA has handled putting forth a tailored rule to stop emissions from major sources that make new improvements or are yet to be built through greater efficiencies was a thoughtful approach and will be a very important contribution to reducing the carbon emissions as best we can until the Congress and the American people insist on doing more important keyed-in legislation, which I think requires at some point putting a price on carbon.
Thank you. Some other press questions over here. Go ahead.
Hey, Congressman Waxman. Darren Samuelson from Politico. While you've been talking, one of my colleagues just reported that the Energy and Power Subcommittee is actually going to go ahead and start the markup of that bill on Thursday. What are you going to do to stop it? Can you stop it? Do you have any other alternatives planned?
Well, I have to face the reality that in our committee, it'll be hard to stop legislation with which I disagree. I'll have to make the arguments as best I can, and I think I can make them quite well. We will lose the vote in committee. We may even lose a vote on the House floor. But we're making the argument for the Senate and for the administration and for the American people. Passing a bill out of committee and even out of the House does not produce a law. That's something I relearned last year, and the Republicans are going to learn this year.
The Senate continues their quorum call. They're scheduled to begin work on 3 judicial nominations in about 15 minutes at 4:30 Eastern. Votes on those and a procedural vote on the patent law overhaul are expected around 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Meanwhile, The news from Wisconsin is that Governor Scott Walker is rejecting a request for a meeting from the leader of Senate Democrats in his state. Those Democrats fled to Illinois to block a vote on the governor's plan that would take away collective bargaining rights from public workers. Governor Walker says the request for a meeting along the Illinois-Wisconsin border is ridiculous. That's from the Associated Press.
Without objection, so ordered.
As we re-engage in the ongoing debate over government spending this week, it's worth noting that some on the other side appear to have already decided to fold up their tents. Last week, Republicans showed we could change the status quo in Washington by cutting government spending. It was a small step, but a step in the right direction. And some of us were hopeful momentum was finally building for the kind of bipartisan consensus that would enable us to cut even more government red ink this week. Unfortunately, the Assistant Majority Leader seems to have had enough. Yesterday, he said that cutting $6 billion pushes the limits of what's needed to live within our means. Mr. President, this is ludicrous. Ludicrous. So far this fiscal year, Washington has spent nearly $650 billion more than it's taken in this year. That's a little more than $4 billion a day that Washington is spending over and above what it has to spend. And Senator Durbin thinks Democrats in Congress have pushed the limits of responsibility by agreeing to cut $6 billion more this year. Imagine if every American had the same approach to their credit card bills. Imagine calling up your credit card company and asking first if you could just freeze your out-of-control spending habits in place. Just freeze them in place. Then when they say no, imagine telling them you don't want to cut down your monthly spending because you prefer living outside your means. This is the logic of our friends on the other side. Now, according to this logic, they'd rather draw a line in the sand than agree to cut another dime in spending at a time when Washington is spending about $4 billion more every day, every single day, than it's taking in. Republicans have been hopeful that we can make progress and reach a bipartisan solution on this issue. So it's my hope that the Assistant Majority Leader was speaking for himself and not for his entire conference. This, of course, is the debate that most people in Washington will continue to be focused on this week. And it's an important debate. But focusing on day-to-day expenses threatens to obscure an even larger threat. And here I'm talking, of course, about entitlement programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Anyone who has looked at these programs, closely knows they're becoming unaffordable. That doing nothing risks not only the future of these programs themselves, but our nation's future as well. And anyone who looks at history also knows that the best time to address a crisis like this is a time like right now, when two parties share power in Washington. This is the time, Mr. President. I've made the case for action publicly and in private conversations with the White House. As Republican leader, I put this issue front and center my first day on the job. 4 years ago, I came to the floor and said that the demographic changes taking place in America made it incumbent upon us as a body to reform Social Security. 2 years later, when the American people put a Democrat in the White House, I renewed my call for action. I said that Republicans stood ready to work with the President on entitlement reform. And I repeated that call again 4 months ago when the voters decided to put Republicans in charge of the House of Representatives. Throughout this time, I've held out hope that our friends on the other side would rise to the occasion. If not when Republicans control the White House, at least when they did. I was encouraged further when President Obama said repeatedly back in 2009 that his administration would seek to work with us on serious entitlement reform that preserves a safety net for our seniors, for people with disabilities, and which also puts on a firmer, stable footing for generations to come. So the President has acknowledged the seriousness of the problem. He has noted himself that costs are escalating even as the population is getting older, creating the perfect storm for a fiscal crisis that dwarfs even today's budget crisis, as urgent as it is. If both parties agree on all of this, I thought, then there's no reason we can't do this for the good of the country. The urgency for action has only intensified in recent months as we've seen the uproar in a number of state capitals. Every state is different, but the problems in every one of them can be summed up pretty easily. Lawmakers from New Jersey to California and just about everywhere in between made promises they couldn't keep. But the promises lawmakers in Washington have made puts the states to shame. If you add up the unfunded liabilities in all 50 states, you get, by one estimate, about $3 trillion total. Add up Washington's promises on Social Security and Medicare alone, and it's over $50 trillion. $50 trillion that we promised to the American people that we don't know how we're going to pay for. Something must be done, and now is the time to do it. Republicans are ready and willing. Where is the president? Suddenly, at the moment when we can actually do something about this, he's silent. As one columnist in the Washington Post put it, for a man who won office talking about change we can believe in, the president can be a strangely passive president. One of the greatest fiscal challenge on the greatest fiscal challenge of the day, he appears, at least so far, to have taken a pass. This is obviously deeply disappointing to me personally, given my repeatedly raising of this issue. But more importantly, it should be deeply disappointing to every American who had reason to hope that we could tackle these issues in a moment of divided government. And it should be disappointing to all of those who believe this president when he pledged he would shake up the status quo in Washington. Past presidents had the foresight to seize the moment, to reach across party lines to solve an earlier funding problem with Social Security in the case of President Reagan and welfare reform in the case of President Clinton. So it's not a question of whether it's possible, but a question of whether the president has the courage to step up to the challenges that we face. In this case, one can't help but wonder if the president who came into office promising change has been changed by the office instead. I hope I'm wrong about all this, but all the signs point toward inaction on the part of the White House, and in my view, this would be a tragic failure of leadership.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I ask consent to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Mr. President, there was an interesting letter to the editor in the New York Times over the weekend, and it was sent by 2 Minnesota state representatives, and I apologize for not having their names immediately at my fingertips, but I'm going to include them in the record when we have a chance to insert them here. But a Democrat and Republican Minnesota state representative wrote a letter to the editor. It was in response to an article written by David Brooks. And Brooks, whom I respect very much, is a conservative but a very thoughtful man that I read with a lot of interest. And Brooks had written about what to do with the state and federal challenges when it came to budget deficits. And what these 2 Minnesota state representatives said, Democrat and a Republican, is that we acknowledge in our state and nation what we face. We face a situation where we have a weak economy, and we face a situation where the debts that are being incurred by our levels of government are going up too fast. And so having acknowledged that, we've got to find a solution. And I'm going to probably not say this as accurately, but I thought they said it so well. They said, we've come to the conclusion that we just can't cut our way out of the problem, and we can't tax our way out of the problem. We've got to think our way out of the problem. We can't lurch from one budget battle to another budget battle without looking at the fact that our challenge is a structural, long-term challenge. It doesn't relate to the immediate budget, but to a lot of things that are happening over a long period of time. And I reflected on that for a minute, and I thought, you know, I think there's real wisdom in what they say. Because if you look at what we face at the federal level, there are reasons why we're running into these budget problems, not the least of which, as Senator McConnell mentioned earlier, is the fact that the population of America is changing. Baby boomers are going to reach a point where they'll be drawing on government benefits they've paid for over a lifetime. And as more and more of them draw on these benefits, there's an obvious question as to whether the reserves are there to take care of them. So how do we deal with that? Now, let me speak to 2 particular issues that Senator McConnell raised. The first is Social Security. Social Security. Is there a program that is more important to America? I can't think of one. That is the starting point of the New Deal. when President Roosevelt said, "We have got to give seniors in America some peace of mind that when retirement rolls around and their senior years roll around, that they will in fact have enough money to live on." Not in a luxurious way, but the basics. There was a time I can remember in my family and in many American families where grandparents moved back in with the kids because there was no place to go. They could no longer work, and they could no longer afford their homes, and they became part of the larger family. It happened in my family, it happened in others. Then came Social Security, and with a little planning and a little saving and Social Security checks, senior citizens had independence. It was a critically important thing. It was an insurance plan, not a welfare plan, an insurance plan that virtually every American paid into and every American drew from. And so where are we today? I arrived in Congress in 1983, brand new member of the House from Illinois, and they said, "Welcome to Washington, Social Security's broke." I said, "Great. I thought I'd get a little breathing space here," but in fact, there was none. And so President Ronald Reagan and House Speaker Tip O'Neill, a political odd couple if you've ever seen one, got together and hammered out an agreement. The agreement that we reached and voted for in 1983 resulted in Social Security remaining solvent from then until 2037. We wanted to buy 75 years of solvency, but we bought over 50. So those who say today that Social Security is in trouble, I would remind them, untouched, with no action by Congress, Social Security will make every payment it has promised to every Social Security recipient with a cost of living adjustment every month of every year until 2037. There aren't many things you can say that about in Washington, that for over 25 years this program is financially sound. But the bad news is, in 2037, things change dramatically. Untouched at that point, Social Security benefits will go down 22%. Now that's a heavy hit on lower-income retirees and middle-income retirees. And so we know that looming 25 years over the horizon is a terrific challenge. President Obama created a deficit commission. Senator Harry Reid was kind enough, I guess kind is a word, was nice enough to appoint me to this commission, and I spent 10 months listening and then voted for the final commission product. It went into Social Security, and it suggested some things that are inherently controversial. For example, if you're going to give Social Security a longer life, what's the mix? What will you cut in benefits? How much will you increase revenue? Those are the two things. I've said Social Security is basic arithmetic. Medicare is advanced calculus. But Social Security is basic arithmetic, although those basic decisions really get to the heart of when you retire, how much you receive when you retire, and how much you pay in your payroll deductions each month. And so the Commission reached an agreement, and there were parts of it I didn't like, but it did buy 75 years of solvency for Social Security. It is interesting that we brought it up then as part of the Deficit Commission because literally Social Security does not add to the deficit. Currently there's a surplus in the Social Security Trust Fund, and that trust fund is being invested in government securities and being paid interest, but it does not add to the deficit. And so many of my colleagues have argued, why are we debating Social Security as part of deficit reduction if it doesn't have a direct connection? And that's a legitimate point. I've raised the same point myself. I think we should look at it. We should do it in a separate and parallel track to deficit reduction. And I welcome what Senator McConnell said. Let's have that conversation. But I don't think that it needs to be the necessary starting point for deficit reduction because there is no connection between the two. Then I heard Senator McConnell say that the President has not shown leadership on Medicare. I respectfully disagree with Senator McConnell. The whole debate about health care reform was lowering the cost of health care. You cannot balance the budget of America with 13 million people unemployed and without addressing the skyrocketing costs of health care. And so President Obama worked with Congress, House and the Senate, to reduce the growth in the cost of health care. One area was in Medicare. And time and again, the senator from Kentucky and his colleagues came to the floor and gave critical speeches saying, quote, the Obama plan is going to take $500 billion out of Medicare. day after day after day, $500 billion out of Medicare. Well, if we are seriously talking about budget deficit reform, if we're talking about Medicare reform, we are talking about reducing the anticipated expense of Medicare and reducing at least $500 billion in cost. What will that mean to the Medicare recipients across America? Does it mean less coverage, less care? It doesn't have to. I always use as an illustration the average cost per Medicare beneficiary. In my hometown of Springfield, Illinois, the average annual cost is between $7,000 and $8,000. Okay? You go up to Chicago, more specialty hospitals, a little higher cost of living. It's not $7,000 to $8,000, it's $8,000 to $10,000 a year for the average Medicare beneficiary. But then you go down to Miami, and the number is $14,000 to $15,000 a year. Why the dramatic difference between Chicago and Miami? That's a question we ought to ask. Is there better care in Florida or just more expensive care? Can we bring the cost of that care down and not compromise the quality of the care? Hard questions, but the only questions that count if you want to have reform in Medicare that doesn't sacrifice the basic benefits. What I would say to Senator McConnell is this. Yesterday, he quoted me, I guess, early in his statement. I wasn't on the floor. Yesterday, I said that I was supporting not the House Republican budget, but the budget proposed by Senator Inouye. This budget, for the remainder of this year, the next 6.5 months, would cut about $10 billion more out of spending. We would have cut $51 billion below what President Obama had asked for this year. So in the Senate, we will have reached 51. In the House, they went $100 billion below what the President asked. I think there is a qualitative, not just quantitative, but qualitative difference in the approach. I think the House Republican budget went too far. I just don't believe that we need to cut the basics in education for the lower income families across America, and that's exactly what the House Republican budget does. Let me give you an illustration. They reduced dramatically the amount of money that's going to be spent on Head Start. I don't know how many members have had a chance to visit Head Start programs. I did a couple weeks ago in Chicago. These are kids from the lowest income families in Chicago. These are kids who are most likely to drop out without some intervention, most likely to struggle in pre-K and kindergarten, and most likely to have a difficult time learning. So they bring them into Head Start at an early age, and they learn. And the one that I visited in Chicago, it was nothing short of amazing. They were teaching these little kids, and they were so impressive, Chinese as well as a Nigerian dialect, and these kids were just chattering away. And I thought, this experience, being together, learning, singing, being so happy about it, cannot help but prepare these kids for a classroom setting where they're going to learn in just a couple years. The House Republican budget dramatically cuts the Head Start programs. These kids and the teachers and staff that support them will be gone under their proposal. And what will happen to those kids? I'm not sure. I don't know if there'll be a babysitter down the street or whether someone else will intervene, but it's possible. Without early intervention and early training and education, these kids are going to show up in a year or two for pre-kindergarten and kindergarten and really not be as far along as they should be. Does that make their chances at success better? No, of course not. We know that. The studies have shown it. The second area that the House Republican budget cuts is the money to school districts in the poor parts of America. Now, in my home state, there are plenty of those. My hometown of East St. Louis, Illinois, for example. To cut back on federal assistance to that poor community at this moment in time, I think would really be a mistake. We need to make sure that these young people have good teachers and good resources and can learn even though they live in a town that is economically poor. The House Republican budget cuts that money and cuts the teachers for these school districts. And then it cuts the money for Pell Grants. Pell Grants are the college aid grants given to students from lower income families. Many of them don't have a chance to go to school unless they get a grant so that they can proceed with their education. The House Republican budget cuts $850 a year out of the Pell Grants for lower income students, students from lower income families. That, unfortunately, will mean that many of them will drop out. When I went to visit with the president of Augustana College, a private Lutheran college in the Quad Cities area, he anticipated they would lose 1 out of every 20 students because of this cut in Pell Grants. So if students, when we have high unemployment, in a recession, are dropping out of college because of House Republican budget cuts, obvious question. Does that make America's workforce any better? Are we in a better position to compete with China and the other countries in the world? Or will we sacrifice our advantage because students have to drop out of school? I think the answer is obvious. And that's why the House Republican budget, which some support, I think goes too far. It cuts too much in education. It would cut dramatically in medical research. What were they thinking in the House of Representatives? That we would cut the National Institutes of Health medical research in critical areas, Alzheimer's, Lou Gehrig's disease, diabetes, cancer, at a time when we know that research and innovation are critical for America's success. Why would the House Republican budget cut back so dramatically in areas that we know pay off? I think they made some poor choices, and that's why I support the Senate Democratic approach. $10 billion in cuts, but preserving in education, worker training, education research, innovation, and infrastructure the investments we need at this moment in our history with the recession that we face and 13 million Americans out of work. That, to me, is why the difference is so stark in contrast. Senator McConnell spoke with the President and said that he needed to show more leadership. I know where the President is on this. He wants us to reach an agreement in terms of the decisions which we need to make to move us toward a balanced budget. But we need to do it in a thoughtful way. First, coming out of this recession, making America's workforce stronger for the future, helping small businesses create jobs, and investing in infrastructure which creates good-paying jobs right here in America. I'm going to ask now, Mr. President, that I understand that we are going to go into executive session, and I'm going to pause at this time and ask that if the chair is ready to report executive session so that I can discuss 2 judicial nominations.
Morning business is closed, and under the previous order, the Senate will now proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations, which the clerk will report.
Nomination: Anthony J. Battaglia of California to be United States District Judge. Sue E. Myerscough of Illinois to be United States District Judge. James A. Shadid of Illinois to be United States District Judge.
Under the previous order, there will now be 1 hour for debate with respect to these nominations, with the time equally divided in the usual form.
Mr. President.
Senator from Illinois.
Mr. President, I rise in support of 2 of the nominees. I will vote for all 3, but I rise in support of 2 of the nominees, Sue Myerscough and James Shadid, to be U.S. District Court judges for the Central District of Illinois. These are nominees which I presented to the President and which passed through the review, not only by the White House, but also by the Senate Judiciary Committee, and now come before us today to be considered by the United States Senate. This day has come not a moment too soon for the Central District of Illinois, which I call home. It's a huge district. It covers 46 counties and includes the state capital, as well as cities like Peoria, Urbana, and Rock Island. Since last August, the Central District of Illinois has had only 1 federal district court judge out of 4. There's supposed to be 4. And unfortunately, 3 seats have been vacant. Those 3 vacancies were all designated as judicial emergencies by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts. The Chief Judge and the only active judge not in senior status of the district, Mike McCuskey, also one of my nominees, has just done an amazing job keeping the judicial system running for the past 7 months. Mike, in years gone by, had some health issues, and they asked him whether there was anything they could do to relieve the stress that he was facing, being the only judge out of 4 in the district, and he said only the Senate can relieve this stress. So today, Mike McCuskey, we're going to do our best to relieve that stress and send 2 excellent new district court judges. It hasn't been easy. Right now, there are no active status judges in the federal courthouses in Springfield and Peoria. Judge McCuskey's based in Urbana. He's put a lot of miles on his car, driving around this large district to keep the dockets moving. I salute him for his dedicated service, and I want to also salute Judges Mike Mem, Joe Billy McDade, Harold Baker, and Richard Mills, who stepped up to help out the district despite some personal challenges, family and health challenges. They've really stepped in, even though they are in senior status, to try to make sure that the district is served. I'm pleased today that help is on the way to the Central District of Illinois. And I also want to thank my colleague, Senator Mark Kirk, who has joined me in presenting these nominees to the Senate. The first I want to mention is a friend of mine for many years, Sue Myerscough. She has been prominent on the legal landscape of Springfield for many years. She has over 23 years of judicial experience, currently serves as an elected justice on the Illinois 4th District Appellate Court. Justice Myerscough has been nominated to fill the Springfield-based judgeship that was vacated by the retirement of Judge Gene Scott, another one of my appointees who served that district so well. Justice Myerscough is a Springfield native. She earned her bachelor's and law degree from Southern Illinois University. She began her legal career as a law clerk for Judge Harold Baker of the same Central District, and following her clerkship, she worked for 6 years in private practice. Judge Myerscough was appointed as an associate judge of the Illinois 7th Judicial Circuit in Springfield in 1987. In 1990, elected as a circuit judge for that court. During her 11 years as a trial judge, she presided over thousands of bench and jury trials, including some of the most complex civil litigation and murder trials. In 1998, Justice Myerscough was elected to her current seat on the Illinois Appellate Court, and in 2008 won her retention election. During her years on the Appellate Court, she's authored over 1,200 decisions on a wide range of issues. Justice Myerscough has worked to promote legal education for school children, and since 2001, she's served on the Board of Visitors for the Southern Illinois University Law School. She is an excellent judge. She's an excellent lawyer. She has a great family, and I'm just proud that the President presented her name and the Senate will have a chance to vote on her today. Jim Shadid is a leading figure in the Peoria legal community. Currently serves as judge on the 10th Judicial Circuit in Peoria County. He's been nominated to fill the Peoria-based federal judgeship that was vacated when Judge Mim took senior status. Judge Shadid was born in Peoria, received his undergraduate degree from Bradley University. He was quite a baseball player for the Bradley Braves. He was a two-time team MVP and was inducted into the Bradley Athletics Hall of Fame. After graduation, he played a season of minor league baseball and then turned his talents to law, getting his J.D. from John Marshall Law School in Chicago. He was first appointed as a circuit judge in 2001, won retention elections in 2002 and 2008. He has presided over approximately 300 trials and thousands of additional pleas and sentencing. Prior to his service on the state bench, Judge Shadid worked as an attorney in private practice, as a part-time Peoria County public defender, as a part-time commissioner on the Illinois Court of Claims, and as an assistant attorney general in Illinois. In addition to his broad legal experience, Judge Shadid has an impressive record of service to the Peoria community, including tenure as president of the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Peoria. Judge Shadid was the first Arab American to serve as state judge in Illinois. Upon his confirmation, he will be the only Arab American federal judge in the state and one of the only a handful nationwide. There is a large Arab American community in Peoria, including my friend, the U.S. Transportation Secretary Ray LaHood. I know this community, and all of Peoria and Illinois will be so proud of Judge Shadid. Both Justice Myerscough and Judge Shadid were unanimously reported by the Judiciary Committee last month, and in a short time the Senate will take up their nominations. I hope my colleagues will agree that the people of Illinois will be well served with these two fine individuals on the bench. We'll still have one vacancy when these two are approved, and fortunately President Obama has nominated another excellent candidate to fill that vacancy. Sarah Darrow is a distinguished federal prosecutor I was pleased to recommend to the White House, and I look forward to working with my colleague Senator Kirk to consider her nomination in an expedited fashion. I also am working with Senator Kirk. We have a bipartisan agreement in terms of filling all vacancies, and Senator Kirk is in the process now of choosing a judge to fill one of the vacancies in the Northern District of Illinois. Last year, the Senate confirmed 3 excellent judges for the Northern District: Judge Gary Feinerman, Judge Sharon Coleman, and Judge Ed Chang. I might mention that Judge Chang had been recommended by the Republican Selection Committee the year before, and I found him to be an excellent candidate. Party aside, he is going to serve very well and is now serving on the Northern District. Senator Kirk and I will continue to work together to find excellent judges for that Northern District. In conclusion, Mr. President, as we proceed toward this evening's votes, I urge my colleagues to join me in supporting the nominations of Sue Myerscough and Jim Shadid. They will make superb federal judges in a district that desperately needs their service on the bench. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Conklin.
ask consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And I ask consent that any time on the quorum call be equally divided between both the Republican and Democratic sides.
Without objection, so ordered.
Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senate is in a quorum call right now. They're considering nominations of 3 judges, Sue Myerscough and James Shadid of Illinois and Anthony Battaglia of California. We're expecting votes in less than 30 minutes at about 5:30 p.m. Eastern. Also a potential procedural vote on the patent law overhaul. You're watching live Senate coverage here on C-SPAN 2.
Mr. President,